Have you ever met a tech company or company in general, if you've ever worked in corporate, that spends more time planning the thing that needs to be done than actually doing the thing? And I think that's probably in general a corporate downfall, and anyone who's ever been in a Teams meeting knows what I mean. And my husband, Mr. Christian Screen, knows how much I hate when I get a message that says, let's quickly have another meeting about that because I'd rather just go do the thing. So the problem is universal, but I think the problem exists specifically in companies that have to deal with large projects like data. So we're going to unpack that today. Welcome to episode 2 of Data Minding.
You're listening to Data Minding, the show where tech meets real talk. Hey guys, I'm Christian Screen, your data and AI evangelist.
And I'm Kirsten Screen, the one here to make sure the tech brain actually speaks human. Every week, we take you inside the world of enterprise data and AI, uncovering what's working, what's new, and how to make sense of your own data. Let's mind it, and get into this episode.
Hello, Mr. Screen. Welcome back.
Greetings, salutations.
Thanks for spending some time with me. I want to talk about something that you and I have both experienced as entrepreneurs, but I think you deal with it on a different level than I do, because in my world of entrepreneurship, things tend to move fairly quickly. In your world of data and the work related to data, whether that was in your corporate installments of working with data or now in entrepreneurship of working with data, what I've noticed is that things move very slowly. And I don't mean the work that has to be done for data, but I mean the decisions that lead to companies finally pulling the trigger on data work. Why do you think it takes corporations forever to settle down and go, yes, we're pulling the trigger on this project?
Yeah, it's another good but loaded question.
Those are my favorites.
Yeah. You can go so many different ways on those types of questions. Well, data is just so vast. I think it needs to start there. And because it's usually all across the organization, the first question is like, what data do we need? And I think there's a quick, non-subjective answer in most organizations, and it is what leadership needs. Okay, so it's all going to start with leadership. And now leadership is typically not data people, right? They're information people.
Yes.
I think it's an interesting bifurcation to make, right? You know, your data are all the zeros and ones, the bits, the bytes, the PDFs, the Word documents, the SharePoint documents, right? The files, the spreadsheets. And you need a way to coalesce that into information that's usable for the organization. And so I think the transmission of that just general knowledge of, hey, we've got a load of data, but what we really need is information. We need signal versus noise. And I think that's the first thing that we should really take into account. I don't care if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a Fortune 500 company, it's at the end of the day, it's about the information and using that information to your advantage to create your differentiators and your market advantages.
So if you're then the decision maker and you need information, and information is money because you can't make decisions without information, why do these companies spend weeks and months kicking the proverbial rock down the road instead of just saying, let's do the thing that we said we needed to do, making the assumption, of course, they figured out what the information is that they need and they figured out what the data is. But then why does it take so long for these corporations to finally say, let's go do the thing?
I think it comes down to just the general malaise of work and duty separation, right? So the idea is that one group knows what they mainly need, and the other group might know how that needs to get done, and those two things don't always align.
Are these two groups not talking to each other?
Well, they might be talking at each other.
Okay.
Right? And I think one of the problems is, if you think data, you're mainly talking, unfortunately, IT these days. And this goes back to where working at Office Depot corporate headquarters 20 years ago.
Oh, going way back, throwing it way back.
Way back. An office of the CFO is typically where I learned all my data and analytics skills. And that business/technical acumen, I think it's not taught these days, right? Like usually the IT people, they're just kind of sitting in the basement. And then you have the very functional business people who know what they need. I won't say they're sitting in the ivory tower, but they are the folks who are front-facing to the board, they're front-facing to the street, they're front-facing to the business in and of itself. And I think disconnect is that communication between those layers in a lot of organizations.
So it's really the corporate beast of there's too many layers, too many silos, and the bureaucracy, the sheer bureaucracy of the process delays the end goal. But then let's talk about money in that for a second. Because it's such a behemoth to move for most corporations, that's costing money every day. And I know you're not going to be able to put a dollar amount on it, but just from your experience, having been on the inside of the Fortune 500 beast and on the outside of the Fortune 500 beast and having consulted for the Fortune 500 beast, how much money is this costing corporations to not get down to brass tacks and actually do the thing and just hire the people and just start the project?
I'm sure billions on the macro level. Lots of dollars. I think there's a great term, it's called opportunity cost, right? And I think, again, this is the difference between the business and the technical folks, and you always need that liaison, you need that person in the middle. A lot of times people put a project manager in the middle of that, but a lot of times that project manager in organizations, they're working on 4 to 14 projects. So where their focus is kind of all over the place. So even if they're seasoned and they've worked with that company for a number of years, they still have to deal with kind of the rigmarole of trying to manage not only a lot of different projects, but both sides to be that liaison.
So then from an opportunity cost, I want to bring this back to our topic of conversation, data and AI. If there's one thing that I have learned being on the periphery of the work that you do, data and AI specifically moves very, very quickly. So now when you're talking about opportunity cost for corporations that are seeing a problem, they're seeing a handicap that maybe their frontline workers are dealing with every day, that has to be sped up, that has to be solved, a problem that covers 80 locations and has to be addressed. And the problem exists now, but now you roll it back through the bureaucracy of the behemoth of the ivory tower not having adequate or accurate conversations and data sharing, information sharing with the folks in the basement, we're wasting time. So by the time you actually get to the place where the project is handled, we're already months behind the pain point rearing its head for your frontline workers.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, technology is just moving fast, but the fundamentals are fairly static, if you think of it that way, right? Like good fundamentals. On a previous episode, we were talking about digital transformations, AI transformations as a strategic approach to kind of wrangling this beast of data and now AI. So the technology is moving fast. Look, every year there's going to be a newer, hotter, greater, faster, better solution that's out there. And the fundamentals of having, one, a solid team that understands the business and the data and the information, 2, having good grounded software, and then also good partnerships. Because if you look at the teams that are doing data and AI well, they're not doing it by themselves. Right. And I think what people need to realize when they see the headlines in the news, your company is not Netflix. Your company is not Airbnb. There are tens of thousands of SMBs, mid-market enterprise companies out there. And only a small percentage of those are the Facebooks, the AMDs. So let's take the Fortune 500. And I want to be clear, like we have customers that are Fortune 500. And it's not a knock against any of them, but not all of them are doing data or AI well. So, which
I think will be surprising to people listening, that you have these large corporations and they're in the news and they're probably still not doing it well.
Exactly. And now that could be subjective, right?
Sure.
What does well mean? But I think if you look at the general problem, when we talk to corporations, enterprise level, mid-market, doesn't matter what size they are, and we talk about data and information, you get the same type of pain points.
Like
right?
what?
I walked into a meeting with our team, with the executive board. We're looking at reports, and we all have different numbers for specific categories or key performance indicators. So why is that? Right. And the team spends the first 15 minutes of the meeting trying to understand whose numbers are correct.
Right.
And typically they're looking at the highest ranking person in the room, and they're looking at the person closest to the data information. And those two people, I won't say they're going to fight it out, because the top ranking person is going to win.
Right.
And they're going to typically be the person who's the most frustrated and seek the correct answers, the fastest, and want corrective action and things like that. And then it just cycles, because that team typically spins out and they're going to do more of the same until somebody really gets frustrated, somebody leaves, somebody gets fired, or they bring someone else in to finally figure it out and make that change for them.
So the issue with it taking so long to pull the trigger on these necessary projects to move things along isn't always just because the C-suite's kind of sitting on their hands and not making decisions. It's because you're first having to unravel what information are we actually working with, and who's got the right information, and how come yours doesn't match his when we're all supposedly working with the same numbers. So there are true hang-ups in the process to get to a decision.
Absolutely. I think it boils down to communication, right?
Does it though? Because what you just said, does it boil down to communication, or does it boil down to having accurate access to the data collectively at all times?
I think there's a little bit of that as well, right? You could have massive amounts of data, but what does that data shape? How do you shape that data to be informative to the business that needs it, right? So you take a simple example of maybe some e-commerce system, and it's, hey, how many visitors did we have today? What was our revenue on the site or the portal today? But then if you go down to like smaller numbers of like, okay, well, how many discount coupons were applied? And you look at other factors like, well, how are we trending on that data? You get to a point where you're asking so many questions about the data. Do you have all that data together? What if you want to combine that and look at comparisons of how your site or your company is comparing to other sites in that same space? And now you're talking about not just your data, but other data that's going to make sense to the business when you're talking about, hey, we're doing comparisons, comparative analysis, we're looking for needles in the haystack. And then if you have many different people looking at it from different perspectives, how do you know they're looking at it from the same source of information? And so all these things kind of compile on top of each other to make it more difficult to communicate what the business actually needs for information versus just, hey, we have the data, why is it wrong? Yeah.
And we're here to make a decision on pulling the trigger on hiring somebody to do a project. We're still like, so we just took 7 steps back instead of moving forward. So then from your perspective, again, as somebody who's been in it, has sat in the C-suite, conversations with the CFO, the CEO, but has also at one point many decades ago been the guy in the proverbial basement doing the actual data crunching and has kind of run the gamut in between. What should people be doing? What should corporations be doing to actually move their data usage forward and get the projects done that benefit the company bottom line, whether that's fiscal or time?
Yes. So I don't think there's an easy button, and I don't think there's...
Nobody likes that answer, though.
And there's no one simple answer. But what I think there needs to be accountability. Okay.
To whom?
So to oneself in general, but to the initiative at hand and to whatever that target goal is. So one of the problems that I think anyone who's working in data analytics and AI will see is that it often seems like a moving target. So because things change so frequently, trying to find those 2 or 3 strategic projects, initiatives, or goals, and that could be a report, it could be a dashboard, it could be some output that needs to be presented or calculated, but that should be the first step, right? So accountability to these small but meaningful goals and targets. And then where the communication comes in is having somebody who can articulate both the technical need but also that functional / business need, right? What is that output? And once you have that defined, then the technical people in collaboration, right? And this is where that accountability comes in, right? In collaboration with the person who knows what needs to get done, works with the person or the group who knows how to get it done. And that combination, holding both those people accountable, is super important to even just moving the needle, even just moving in that direction, and then setting up some very reasonable timelines in which that can be achieved. And then the second problem we see with that, even taking that approach, is once that is delivered in that time frame, that reasonable time frame, having a process that says that it can be validated. So that the technical people deliver to the business or the functional people, whatever that goal is. And there's a clear process for those people who now review this to say, yes, thank you, that is what I asked for. Or no, thank you, this is not what I want. And a clear set of steps that allow them to remediate or fix that without jumping through other hoops and without starting some other process or initiative, and focusing and just fixing the 1 or 2 things, and not fixing 100 things, but fixing the 1 or 2 things that were wrong that will get that to be validated, right, and solved.
Do you find that most companies need an outside group to facilitate this process? Or do you find that most companies, once they understand what they actually want and how to communicate internally?
That's another question that is controversial.
Well, and maybe the answer is it depends on the company and the case, but
that's the consultant answer.
I don't want the diplomatic answer. I want the, what's the pain point that you're seeing with companies that are saying, we have data issues, we're trying to get stuff done, we have frontline daily process issues, operational issues, we're trying to alleviate these. Are they getting it done without external help?
So I'll try to throw out an analogy, okay? So you're asking to have something built. So think of a car or think of a house. And you can think of this data solution, this AI solution as one of those things. Would you be able to go build a house or a car by yourself?
And I see the dilemma because I'm sure there's an answer of out of 100 people, you might find 0.5 that could, but the reality is most probably couldn't. But you'll probably also find 10 people in that 100 that think they can and spend a lot of time doing things because the ego tells them they can, when really, and this I think brings me back to the original point of what we wanted to talk about today with the kicking the rock, right? Inadvertent kicking of the rock. It may not be intentional kicking of the rock, but just truly believing we can get this done. But meanwhile, you've spent so much time and resources and energy trying to cobble it together when really you probably just needed to call the guy who can build the car.
Exactly. I'll go with the house analogy, right? If you are looking to build a house, or let's call it a data warehouse, a data lake house, or AI infrastructure that you need, similar to building a house, you might be the interior designer in this scenario. So you, the organization, Mr. Ms. Fortune 500 company, you're in the marketing, you're the director of marketing, you're the director of IT, director of finance, whatever, and you have a vision, an idea. So you're like, oh, the house that I want to build looks like such. You might be thinking on the inside, I've got this, beautiful drape.
You got the curtains, you got the wallpaper, you got the things.
Yeah, you got all this. But you've never poured a foundation in your entire life.
Right.
So you need the group to come in to help you pour the foundation, to build up the walls, to get everything going in a very legitimate way, right? Not toothpicks and crazy glue, but
not just facades, but an actual structure to build on. So to bring this home and to wrap it up for practical application, I'm a big fan of let's bottom line things that people can actually use. From a practical application perspective, if someone's listening to this and they're mid-level in a corporation and they have to translate this to the decision makers that sign the checks, what's your advice for them to take this to the decision makers and say, we have a problem. We'll solve it, but we probably need somebody else to help us solve it efficiently, effectively, and with a solid foundation. How do they get their decision makers and their higher ups to get speedy on this process instead of dragging it out for months to sign paperwork to get groups engaged and paid?
Yeah. So they didn't get to where they were overnight. Number one. So the solution most likely is not going to happen in a day or two as well. So start small, aim small, miss small, right? So I think from the perspective of getting a group together that can define where you need to go. And that could be bringing a separate group in to do some sort of whiteboarding session, lay out some things, provide you with the latest and greatest things that are out there that are happening, that can benefit, that can bring the value. And then that's going to give you, in the 1 or 2 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, a little bit of a strategy that's going to enable you to hit some very targeted goals. Then based on those targeted goals, create that plan, do some of the things we mentioned earlier. And I think the outcome is going to be much better than if you didn't take that approach, or if you were just trying to hit so many different targets that are moving and not really defining them. So this type of approach is something that is usable, it's practical, and something that can be done fairly quickly.
Well, and I think it's a perfect example from the self-improvement world of you already know if there's a problem. Like if you know there is a problem, the time is going to pass anyway. Do you want to spend that time addressing the problem, or you want to spend that time worrying about the problem and then look back and go, we should have just addressed this problem? So I think to bottom line it for folks, if you realize you're having issues moving forward in whatever that looks like with your data integration, AI, whatever, figure out quickly, with possibly the help of other people, how to identify the problem and isolate it and clearly communicated to people that deal with the information on the back end of that problem, because they're the people that are going to sign the check. So don't spend the time thinking about, well, the problem is still here. Spend the time taking some action and move toward a solution.
We all need a little help every now and then.
especially it seems with data.
It was technology in general, I would say.
Which seems to be outpacing the people that are dealing with it from the day-to-day decision-making perspective. So thanks for another episode. We will pick this back up on the next one. If anybody has ideas and things that they want to hear us talk about, send those in. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to pick Mr. Screen's brain on his experience and his thoughts on, because he's got many, on what's happening in the world of data. So if there's anything specific you want to hear about, let us know, and we will catch you all in the next episode.
Rock and roll.
That's a wrap on this episode of Data Mining. Thanks for hanging out with us.
If you learned something new, do us a favor and hit subscribe, and then share this episode with a colleague.
Don't forget, you can find us over at dlh.io. We'll be back next episode with more stories and strategies around data and AI. See you soon.